Good evening and welcome, everybody. I want to welcome you to the Introduction to Community Documentation. To give you a little bit more information about this project, this was a project that was a culmination of AITC and ASOR coming together to celebrate DC Archaeology Month. So this is the first inaugural DC Archaeology Month, and during this month, we are not only highlighting archaeology, but specifically archaeology in the DC area. And so we thought, what would be more fitting than to train people about cemetery documentation, but to highlight one of our very own cemeteries in the area, Mount Zion Cemetery, the Female Union Band Cemetery. So I want to thank you for agreeing to participate in this program. I hope you learn a lot this weekend. We have a number of partners. Tonight and Sunday, you will be involved in the documentation process where Jared will be leading it from ASOR. But on Saturday, you will go to the Mount Zion Female Union Band Cemetery, and you'll be able to meet members of the cemetery there, but you'll also meet members of the Hansberry Society who are also assisting with this project. So what I would like to do is turn it over to Lisa Fager so that you can learn more about the Mount Zion Female Union Band Cemetery.
Actually, I think we want to throw it to Deborah and then me.
All right, here we are.
Hello.
All right, so hi, my name is Deborah Hurd, and this is Rosetta Cash, and we're here representing the Hansberry Society, William Leo Hansberry Society. We are also ASOR members. We became involved with this project in a way, kind of roundabout way, I'll say. So we had been in contact with ASOR over the past year, asking if we could get some training for our members in different types of documentation and, like geosensing. And so one of the things we started out doing was working with Jared. Jared was working with us, training us on Kobo and also photogrammetry. And so we were supposed to have done some things in November during the ASOR annual meeting. We didn't get to do the photogrammetry part, but we did do some Kobo. And so ASOR reached out to us and invited us to come and participate in this project. So we're very, very happy to be here. We want to thank ASOR. We also want to thank Alexandra with Archaeology in the Community for hosting us and allowing us to be a part of this project. And I'll turn it over to Rosetta to let you know how the Hansberry Society is using this type of technology in the Chicago area.
Hi, I'm Rosetta Cash, and I am from Chicago. One of our members, Yvonne Jones, was unable to join us on this excursion. But there is a cemetery in Chicago called Oakwood Cemetery, and it's a historic cemetery, and a lot of famous African Americans are buried there, as well as some of our personal family members. So one of the things that we want to do in Chicago, especially with Yvonne, is learn these techniques so that we can document those areas within the cemetery where our personal families are, and where some of the historic figures in African American history are located. And on a personal note, my family is from Louisiana, and I found out a few years ago that there is a special cemetery where a lot of my family members were buried. I didn't get to go see it, but my brother and a couple of my sisters did get to see it. So my plan in the future is to go down, to learn these techniques, go down, teach them to some of my family members, and find that cemetery, find that burial site, and start documenting my personal family's history in that area.
All right, so again, we want to thank ASOR and AITC for this, and also Lisa, who will be giving you more information about the cemetery for this fascinating work. And we hope that you all have a very enjoyable weekend. We hope to see you all tomorrow. We're looking very forward to it.
Yes.
So with that, we'll turn it over to Lisa.
Good evening, everyone. And I also want to thank ASOR, who I just learned about in the last couple of weeks. So that's pretty exciting to learn all the work that they do all over the world. And then thank you, Dr. Jones, for including me in this. And I think this is a great opportunity. We have 4 historic cemeteries. Well, of course, we have more than that. Well, I will say we have 4 that are left looking like cemeteries in Washington, D.C., and the Mount Zion and the Female Union Band Society are 2 of the 4 historically Black cemeteries remaining. I am going to pull up my presentation. Let's see. Here we go. And so again, my name is Lisa Fager. I'm the executive director of the Black Georgetown Foundation, which is the nonprofit that oversees and manages these 2 historic cemeteries. So just to give you a historical timeline, this is where we are. The first cemetery that was established is the what we now call the Mount Zion Cemetery, but it was called the Old Methodist Burying Ground when it was purchased in 1808 by the Montgomery Street Methodist Church in Georgetown. This church was both Black and white parishioners and free and enslaved. It is now called the Dumbarton United Methodist Church. The Black folks who attended this church, of course, were relegated to the balcony. They were not given the same full benefits of being a member, except they were allowed to be buried in the cemetery. So both Blacks and whites were originally buried in this cemetery. In 1816, a group of 120 free Blacks at the Montgomery Street Methodist Church decided they couldn't take it anymore. And so they were like, we're out. We want our own church. And the mother church agreed to it. And they were able to get their own church. This is the current church, which is located about 3 blocks from the cemetery now. But the original Mount Zion Church, or what they called the Little Ark, literally was not very far from the cemetery. The church was known to be part of the Underground Railroad. Many activities happened here. They were the first Black church in congregation in Washington, D.C. So they had a little bit more autonomy than, say, most. And so they also used the cemetery for the Underground Railroad. It was William Still, the abolitionist out of Philadelphia, that documented some of the people that came out of this cemetery. Many people hid in this. What you see on the screen is the burial holding vault, and bodies were stored here when it was too cold or too wet to dig. And you can see what the original burial holding vault looked like. Today it has stairs. We suffer from a lot of erosion. The city directs all their water into the cemetery from Q Street in Washington. And they have promised they were going to fix it this year. So we're waiting on that. The second cemetery was established in 1842 by a group of women called the Female Union Band Society. These women were a mutual aid society and were put together to help each other. You didn't have to worry about what to do if you were enslaved, but you did have to worry once you were free. How were you going to pay your bills? How were you going to pay your rents? Where were you going to live? These women were there to help you. You paid in a fee every week. I believe it was $2. And then if you lost your job or became ill, or needed additional monies, these women were here to help you. And not only that, you could have a burial plot. And for years, nobody ever acknowledged that this was the Female Union Band Society cemetery. They just called the whole property Mount Zion. There are no visible like fences that separate the two cemeteries. But once I put it out, you'll see kind of the separate line that they have, and it went all the way down to the water in Rock Creek Park. And here's the map, probably shows it a little better. So the Female Union Band Society side is on the left side. And a lot of times what you'll see in old documents, it'll say Mount Zion West and Mount Zion East. And Mount Zion East would have been the original side of the cemetery that was purchased in 1808 by the church. Oops, going too quick. Here we go. Sorry. So what happens after 1842? You have a integrated cemetery in the Old Methodist Burying Ground where people are being buried. And you have, on the other side, you have of free Black people who are being buried in the Female Union Band Society Cemetery. What happens in 1849 is that there is another cemetery that is adjacent to us, that is separated by, on this map, it says Mill Road. It's technically Line Mill Road. This road right here, and to the left of the to the left of the Female Union Band Society side was a 22-acre cemetery that was purchased by William Corcoran. William Corcoran, many didn't realize, was a Confederate sympathizer. So he made the cemetery white only. What happened then is the white folks that were in the Methodist cemetery decided to dig up their relatives and to bury them in Oak Hill Cemetery and in other cemeteries around the city. This is how we became primarily African American. There are about, I would say, 5 families, white families, that are still left in the cemetery. One very much so on purpose. The Black church has him asterisked as an abolitionist, which is funny because when I go to the white church, they don't have any information on him being abolitionist. But now with some of the research I've been doing, I can see why they call him an abolitionist. He was buying and freeing Black people in the 19th century. And so what did Oak Hill, excuse me, Mount Zion and the Female Union Band Society look like in the 19th and 18th century? Well, it looked very much like Nanny's grave. Nanny is a little girl that was born in 1848 and died in 1856. And people have been leaving toys on her grave since the 80s. Or at least that's, maybe before then, right? But at least we know in the 80s because it was written about in the Washington Post. And so not only was it written about in the Washington Post, just weeks after the Washington Post did an article about people leaving toys on Nanny's grave, there was an 1894 article found about the cemeteries that nobody had ever seen. And it talks about basically the whole cemetery looking like this. There were a lot of children, there were a lot of toys, there were a lot of high chairs. People left the things that they used in life on their graves. And it wasn't just children, it was also adults. So there's an article that talks about there was a coachman, his wife sold his horse and bought him a wooden hobby horse and had it buried coming out of the grave. There's a woman who had her favorite church hats. There were people who were sick. Their medicine was left on the graves. And so I feel like this is like an ancestral memory with people not even knowing that this whole cemetery, and people just talked about how odd it was that all these things were left on top of the cemeteries. And what's interesting is people still leave many things on top of the graves in the cemetery. So you'll see seashells, you'll see rocks, You'll see toys, you'll see candles, you'll see milk bottles. Some things we just recently found. This is a historic picture. This is what happened. So one of the things you'll also notice when you come to our cemetery, if we speed up, a couple things happened. In 1931, or 1930, yeah, 1931, the National Park Service decided to take a half an acre from our 3.5 acre property, which is the total of the 2 cemeteries. Again, I told you we were adjacent to Oak Hill, which is 22 acres, and they didn't take any land from them. So they take a half an acre from us to make a horse trail. And then in the 60s, we're shut down by 1953 because it looked very much like what you're looking at now. Just lots of weeds and overgrowth. And what happened was developers won the right to disinter bodies and build single-family homes. But in the midst of that, a man named Vince DeForest, who was with the Afro-Bicentennial Corporation, which was an organization that was kind of racing towards the 1976 deadline bicentennial to acknowledge Black accomplishments. The National Park Service at that time had 1,500 properties, and only 3 represented African American accomplishments. And so Vince, who is trained as an architect, him and his brother, both architects, really got serious about preservation and saving historic landmarks across the country. And we were the first ones that they saved. There was a really great article written last year about Vince DeForest in the Washington Post. So feel free to look that up. So what happened is when Vince got involved, him and one of the descendants decided, that they did not want this to become a group of single family homes. So what they did is they went and got the properties listed on the National Historic Registry. Then they were worthless to developers, right? But then the judge ordered the place to be reseeded. So you see our volunteers here. We saw what it looked like. And what they did was these volunteers, all people doing, wanting good, is that they removed the headstones from the property and they put them in 3 piles. And that is really where they sit today. And so when you go to the cemetery, you'll notice there are 3 piles of headstones all kind of gathered together. Not so bad as what you see in this picture, but they're all laying on the ground. I don't think I have a picture of it right now, but they're all laying kind of on the ground. Some of them are up, as you see here at the end of this slide. But for the most part, there are bodies everywhere, 8 to 10,000. We know that some of them were 3 to 5 deep, buried. It's a small space. We're an urban environment. Many of the people that are buried here were part of most of DC's historic plantations, Mount Vernon, Arlington House. This is George Washington's plantation is Mount Vernon. There are descendants of Martha Washington buried in the cemetery. For those who don't know her history, she had a sister that was in half Black, who was enslaved, and her son also bore some children that were to an enslaved woman. So there are several people that are descendants of Martha Washington buried in the cemetery, along with the Syphax family. I mean, just all the DC names you can think of: Proctors, Butlers, Turners. These are all the same surnames. If anybody's familiar with the 272, I think I heard Deborah talk about, was it Deborah or Rosetta, that talked about Louisiana. A lot of folks are finding out they have DC roots who were from Louisiana because of the Jesuits selling 272 to save Georgetown University. We have a lot of those descendants buried in the cemetery as well. And it's also interesting to know those same surnames that were part of the selling of 272 are the same surnames that started the Methodist Church and the same surnames that started the first Black Catholic Church in Georgetown. Catholics were also part of the Female Union Band Society, but we don't have any that we know of so far that are buried in the cemetery. Most of the Catholics and the Methodists that were buried or married went to their separate churches from day one and were buried in separate cemeteries. So they took it to the grave. And I'm going to end here. I don't want to keep going on. I could talk more when we get to the cemetery. This is just the judge who reversed the order, talked about how important it was to save this Black cemetery because it's one of the only monuments left in DC that reflect evolving free Black culture. And so I'm going to leave it there because this is not my show, but I'm really excited and I can share whatever things that I have done in saving or helping preserve Mount Zion and the Female Union Band Society. We have lots of tricks of the trade, including finding 2,500 people within casket maker records. We predate death records by 70 years, so we've had to be really creative to find some of the people who are interred in the cemetery. So I don't know if anybody has any questions. I'm going to stop there so we can get this bowl, come on back, Jared.
Okay. So
Yes.
It's a hard act to follow. Yeah. But thank you, Lisa. That was it's really helpful, especially on Saturday as we're starting to do this documentation. And yeah, so Lisa, I think you're going to be around for the whole 2 hours.
Yep.
So she's here to answer questions. And we're also going to take a couple of breaks or times to answer questions throughout our time on Zoom today. So if you have anything, you're welcome to put them in the chat or in the Q&A. And it looks like we might have one if you'd like to answer that. Yeah.
Yes. So the casket maker records are really exciting because we get all these volunteers throughout our kind of working on this the last 50 plus years. And one of them was a DAR, Daughters of American Revolution researcher who found the casket maker was a furniture maker. And it seems that's how it went back then. You turned out to be a furniture maker, and then all of a sudden you're just doing caskets. And this guy went to the church. He was a member of the Dumbarton or Montgomery Street Methodist Church. And he left his collection of records at George Washington University. And so we were able to find those. And it's fascinating because he took them just like death records would. It's almost like they might have set up the model where, its name, what he was doing, where he worked before he died, where he died. And most people died in their homes back then. So that's great. So we know where they lived. And what's awesome about Georgetown is that these same people, we know where they worked, worshiped, and lived, and free and enslaved worshiped, and lived together. Mm-hmm. And so these records, so now I have an intern going through just casket makers and trying to figure it out. So yeah. So anybody wants to volunteer?
Yeah, it's amazing. And that leads me to the training today. Specifically about what type of information are you interested in collecting? So my name's Jared Kohler. I am the website information manager at ASOR, the American Society of Overseas Research. I meant to share this slide also. And so, but I also have about 15 years of experience training in databases, mainly terms of archaeology projects. And more recently, in the last few years with ASOR, focusing on cemetery documentation and cultural heritage preservation in areas where that type of culture is endangered. So ASOR, for those who don't know, we're a nonprofit organization. Our mission is to initiate, encourage, and support research into the public understanding of the history and cultures of the Near East and wider Mediterranean world. So we were founded in 1900, primarily focusing on the Eastern Mediterranean, supporting academics and archaeologists performing work in that region. But really in the last 10, 15 years, our scope has expanded, and increasingly we're interested in diaspora communities and links between American communities and all around the Mediterranean, and increasingly also in Africa. So I wanted to just share a couple of links with you, just to give a context of how this program really came about. We have a program called the Cultural Heritage Initiatives, which initially started tracking damage to mainly archaeological sites in Syria and Iraq during that conflict in 2014. We worked with local professors who basically they no longer had universities, and they were on the ground documenting every day damage that was occurring because of that. And during these experiences, and also just working with archaeologists throughout the region, we come to notice that heritage survey is not an easy thing. It can be an expensive proposition also. You have to apply for grants. There's all these things that you need to do, at least 10 years ago, to properly document heritage that's in danger. That's less so the case today, mainly because there are these open source and free software options that have become available recently. And so what we were hoping to do is develop a series of tutorials and training modules that can help cultural heritage specialists, but also people who are just interested, no heritage backgrounds, to be able to do the documentation. We want to bring people together with many different types of experiences and provide the tools, mainly the software tools that allow them to work together. So this is I'm just going to bring up the website really quick because I want to mention that everything that I covered today and also on Sunday, these are all freely available on our website. And I will put this in the chat right now as well. So you're welcome to look at that. We have some YouTube videos up, PDF tutorials for all the different types of documentation. And so let me just go through them very quickly, and then we'll get to what I know everyone is here for, and that's to learn how to use some of this software. So today we're going to focus on Kobotoolbox and Photogrammetry. So these tutorials are built as a suite, and what Kobotoolbox does is it's mainly the way that you gather information. It's not a long-term storage solution, but it is a free cloud-based database that's very powerful in the sense that it's a blank slate as you're creating it. You can come up with any type of database fields that you think are useful. And you can also share this with team members spread throughout the country, throughout the world. We've developed many projects with partners in Morocco and Tunisia, for example, where we worked with heritage experts, and then we just worked with local school teachers who knew a particular area better than, the archaeologists that's up in Marrakesh. They all came together to build these databases together. And that really was where all the work came in, is deciding what you're going to collect, what's the purpose of the documentation. So Kobotoolbox is what we're going to cover today. And then photogrammetry is essentially creating 3D models just from photography. So you don't need laser scanners. All you really need is your phone. You need a decent camera and the knowledge of how to take these photos. What's the strategies for doing this to come up with a good 3D model in the end. We won't cover today QGIS or LibreCAD. And this is something that we would like to offer later on, probably in a couple of months, later in the summer. But QGIS is a geographic information system. So it's the ability to take all the information that you collected in Kobo. So at a cemetery, for example, let's say you catalog every grave that you can. You take GPS points, and this QGIS will allow you to plot that all those points, all that information. It combines spatial information with descriptive data. So all those graves, all that information, those photos that you're taking, it all can be in one place. And then you can do interesting, analysis in terms of where certain graves are compared to others, maybe sort by year, sort by whatever information that you decide to collect, whether it is background, ethnicity, anything. So what we're going to focus on Saturday, though, is the Kobo and the photogrammetry. And here's just some examples of some of our programs in Morocco and Tunisia. In the end, we have trained about 80 people who themselves have kind of taken these tutorials and also taught other people. So we could see just here in the top right, for example, this is a local Jewish community in Casablanca. And we're just doing Kobo there in the top right, just on our phones. So you'll see that the software doesn't take a lot to learn, can be very powerful. And again, really what I want to stress today is planning in advance of what type of information you want to collect, and how all that information will connect to one another, how it's going to be useful. What are you interested in discovering? At the end of, by the end of Sunday, we will have something similar to this. We are using we're going to be working at the Mount Zion Cemetery, taking plots, recording some of the tombstones. A lot of this work has already been done, and I want to point to the website for the Mount Zion Female Union Band Society's website, which I will have in a couple slides after this. A lot of this has been done. We're going to be there Saturday just to practice these techniques, because I know many of you have your own cemeteries that you're interested in. Some of you are students, I also saw, who are just kind of interested in documentation in general and how these tools work. But what we will have the ability to do is collect different points. So here's one record, for example, of a grave, a tombstone. This one is in the Solomon Cemetery in Tunisia. This was a Jewish cemetery in a small village in northern Tunisia that was actually being encroached by a factory. So you can see this right here. And they have, you can't see it in this picture, but they have placed all of their construction equipment just right below grave 73. And slowly they're kind of encroaching on the site. And they're, as they do that, they're damaging these existing tombs. No one is maintaining the site. It's kind of just in an empty plot. But one of our partners had recognized this, knew the importance, and so we set out on a program to document it with some of our just the local partners. And so these techniques that we did here, we'll do the same on Saturday, of just coming up with a systematic strategy for documenting and working as a team to fully document a cemetery location. And then here's just an example of the photogrammetry of the 3D models, which are tied to that same map that I showed in the past, in the previous slide. So you're going to learn how to do this. We'll show you how to take the photographs, how to create this 3D model in the end, which we used in the Solomon Cemetery, for example, in a report that we sent to the local municipality, basically to tell the factory to stop moving their equipment, to respect the space. So before we get into the software, I just want to talk about a few lessons that at least I've learned from doing this type of training, just creating databases in general. I've already mentioned how the advanced planning really is crucial. Once you start building databases and all of a sudden you realize, oh, I don't like the connection between maybe this field and that field, that it's actually not useful and it's slowing down the system. the in the end, what you really want to think about is first a couple of questions. Why do you wish to document the cemetery? What is the kind of the main objective? For some, it may just be understanding the lives of each individual, having a catalog, just having in general, just preservation, protecting and preserving the burial grounds for future generations. Who knows if descendants of a particular individual could come across it later. So it's our duty just to do that for that simple fact, to preserve the history as it exists. We also, there's other reasons, relationships of these individuals to the community, to current community, to the past. Many of you, I saw just from the signups, are interested in these things, and these aren't new concepts to you. But again, just to think about what is the purpose of your database? Having a very extensive database that catalogs any type of information you could ever think of is great, and it's important for archival purposes. But the larger that database becomes and the less you plan in advance how that information relates to one another, the more difficult it becomes to tell stories of the cemetery, to find patterns in the information. And these just type of general questions of why are you doing this? What are your goals? Can help you as you're designing these databases. And again, I'm just going to go through these fairly quickly, but just to give a sense of the type of information you may collect. The Mount Zion website has a great database system already in place that might give you some ideas as well. But that's, as I've worked with partners in the past, this is kind of the hardest step is you have a blank page, blank database. What do we want to collect? What type of information is important? And oftentimes creating the database with Kobo can sometimes take 5 to 10 minutes to do. The planning and thinking about how you're going to collect this information could take days or weeks. Here's the Mount Zion Cemetery website. I'll put the website also in the chat so that you can look at it, but they have a great amount of resources, many studies, geophysical studies, even underground, ground penetrating radar, electromagnetic also. And so they have these search biographies, and it's really a kind of a great resource that I recommend you look at. Also, just for giving you, thoughts about how to, what type of information you want to collect when you're documenting cemeteries, both at the large scale. So how graves or how markers relate to one another, and then digging down into individual burials as well. So for a lot of their, they've collected a lot of information that is specific to their cemetery, including just these burial maps and the general place where they may have been believed, certain burials may have been believed to originate. Our cemeteries that we've worked at in Tunisia, Morocco, and also in Mali and Burkina Faso, they have different types of questions and different types of information that they're interested in. So I believe Mount Zion has close to 300 individual fields. And the way they all work with one another, here's just the diagram from their suggested categories. So again, just think in advance about these. I think I've made my point on this, but I really just want to harp on that because as you'll see, as you're learning how to use Kobo, it's a fairly intuitive software, even if you don't have much experience with databases or even really using computers or that sort of thing. You're in control of how all this information is collected. All right, So let's get into the actual software itself. So we're going to talk about both Kobo and Photogrammetry today. We'll start with Kobotoolbox. What Kobotoolbox is, and we'll go to their website in just a second. But what's important is that it's a free and open source software package, and it works best for location and descriptive data collection. It was developed by a few universities and hospitals, actually, who are interested in tracking disease and just general humanitarian crises throughout the world. And so they would have teams of people spread throughout the world, and including in some areas that were inaccessible to some of the team members. But by creating this software, they were able to all come together in one place and collect data and really track, in some examples, track where diseases were moving, where outbreaks were occurring. But it can be used for many different industries, especially archaeology and heritage preservation. A couple of cool features of it is that it can be available online also. So it's cloud-based, and you create your form in the cloud here, which we'll do in just a second. So I'll go step by step and show you how to create one of these databases. But in some places where you don't have access to the internet, you can download an app that's tied to the program, and then download the form onto your phone or onto a tablet. Then if you go into a place where you don't have internet, you can collect all the information. It stores locally on your tablet. And then once you get back to an internet connection, you upload that data back into into the cloud, into the joint program, and it works really well. These are just a couple of examples of some of the types of questions. If you've used a Google Forms also, it kind of has a similar feel. This just has more options, and it has a couple more features that I'll show that lets it tie nicely into like Google Maps or into a QGIS program. This shows, just the kind of different places and ways that you can use it. On Saturday, we're going to bring a couple of tablets that you can experiment with, but you'll also just have the ability to collect data on your phone. We're going to have QR codes with a joint project that you'll come on Saturday, you'll scan the QR code, it'll pop up our form that we're going to create today. And then we'll practice documenting different gravestones. And that's just to show, the ability also to create maps simply, quickly, just online. Okay, so I am putting this here. We'll put this also in the chat, and you're welcome to follow along. What I'm going to do after this is start from scratch. We'll build our own database. I'll show you how all the different questions work, how all the different settings work, and basically get you started on creating your own database for any projects that you're interested in for your own cemeteries. I did want to pause just to see if there are any questions in general about Kobo. I think it's going to become very clear once we start getting into the software a little bit more, but just in general about its capabilities, ideas you may have, or just more questions for Lisa. So I'll just pause for a second. You can put questions in the chat, or you can put them in the Q&A. So I see a question, will we receive a copy of this recording? Yes, we will post this recording. I should have it ready by tomorrow so that everyone can review it before Saturday. It will be, it probably will be a lot of information. Please let me know if I'm going too quickly through any of this. But for both Kobo and Photogrammetry, it's much easier to learn as you're doing it. And so I just want to get all the concepts here, have it recorded, have it as a reference for you to go back to anytime in the future. So I see a couple more questions. I'm going to read them out for everyone. Can you use Kobotoolbox.org to make a database that doesn't focus on one cemetery, but revolves around a family that may be interred in different cemeteries? Definitely. So the nice thing with Kobo is so long as you have the location information, so like a GPS, a longitude, latitude, you can make any type of projects that you'd like. So what we have also done is we have multiple cemeteries that we're interested in. And in particular, one of our grants was looking at Jewish heritage in Morocco and Tunisia. And so that's why we have the Solomon example. But we looked at many cemeteries throughout. And we had one Kobo project for each cemetery, similar to what I showed a little earlier, where we documented every grave. We tried to get as much information as we could from each location. Then we created another Kobo project that's kind of regional, that we just through a series of linking to different projects, we were able to kind of look at wider patterns in the information and put it all in one place in a different Kobo project. So I think just in terms of tracing a family, looking at a family at different cemeteries, it would be a similar concept, where so long as you're able to go to each place and document it, and you have the location information, then you can bring all that together into one place. So I see also another question about Kobotoolbox. Is it interoperable? So that is, can you import or export Excel or CSV files? And the answer is yes. And that is one of the nicest things about it, really, is at its core, it's just a CSV file that the software itself is kind of making the interface more user-friendly. But at any point you can download, you can export all the data that you collect into a CSV, and that in turn can go into any other system. It can go also into the QGIS systems. The one thing I do want to stress again is that Kobo is great for data collection, but it's not a long-term solution for. It's not a database that you would use to keep all your information long-term. And that's because it is open source and free, but they have pretty limited storage and number of records that you can collect per month. It used to, 3 or 4 years ago, it used to be almost unlimited. And it appears that maybe with internal budget or something, that they keep reducing that, and they have a paid tier now that is isn't too expensive depending on your organization's funding, but it's not as free as it used to be. And so you have to make decisions on where you want to store your information long term. But because you can download it as a CSV, you can take all your information and move it somewhere else. That should work out well for you. Okay. So I built in a 10-minute break, which I'm happy to do now. But also I know we're kind of just getting started. So maybe I'll just see in the chat if anyone wants to vote to stop, or we can just keep on going. How's everyone feeling? All right, I see keep going. That was the first vote, so we're just going to do that. Okay, so that's for the next one. What I'm going to do is now show the actual software itself. All right, so just a reminder, here's the ASR tutorials. Here's Kobotoolbox. So if you go to Kobotoolbox, this is the website itself. You can look through, they kind of tell you about some of the features. And now, they have over 20 million projects that they're hosting on their servers right now. I'll say, and I've never had a problem with being unable to access the data. The server's never really been down, at least since I've used it for 3 years. And we have 14,000 organizations using it, in many countries around the world. So it seems like a stable environment, at least for now. And more people are using it for different types of projects. Once you're ready to, to start, you just go to sign up. This, you have these two boxes. This humanitarian server, they're also discontinuing. So you'll want to just do the global server toolbox and create an account. And then just enter your information. Most of this is mandatory. Username I want to mention is case sensitive. So my username, for example, is JM Kohler. That is a different username than if I used a capital J and like a capital R here. So just keep that in mind. And it's caused problems in the past when people, especially they're logging on their phones, and sometimes it just capitalizes the first letter automatically on your phone in a text field. Just pay attention to if you have uppercase or lowercase for that username. Email is important because you can't start creating a database until you get a confirmation email that you then click on and you go back to, and that's how you're able to do it. So we've had some users get hung up on just putting in a random email. They don't want to give their email, but you do need that also if you want to change your password in the future. Country, sector, organization type, these are mandatory, but they don't change the experience at all. I think it's just for their internal, marketing and metrics. So pick whatever works best for you. Same for organization type. And then you agree, password strength has to have a certain number of capital and lowercase letters, numbers, and special characters. Otherwise, it won't let you save. So, pretty straightforward. Anyone can create an account. You can have multiple accounts. I have 3 or 4 that I use just for different projects, and I kind of like to keep it separate. And one thing is, if you're working with a team, so you're creating this database, and let's say you have 10 people on your team, I recommend all 10 people create their own account rather than sharing one account. In part, just because you'll see later on, if you have a whole team entering data in different entries, you want to see who actually recorded what, so you can go back and track that information if something's wrong. If there's an error, just something is unclear, you want to just check for that. And it doesn't cost anything. And because there is storage limits, it's almost better to have multiple people. The storage limit applies like to your ownership, who owns the project. And all that really means is who created the project. That means that you're the owner. So go through that process. Kind of vamping a little bit so that people who are creating an account right now have a chance to catch up. Click on the email. Once you do, now we're logged in. And this is what the dashboard looks like once you've logged in for the first time. Yours will be blank. There's no projects here. These are all the projects that I've created and worked with different partners. I think I have like 108 now or so. Some are more test and only have a few entries. Like these have 2 or 3 entries here. A lot of these have been used for training. So someone will create their own test project and then share it with me so that I can review it and we can go over, what works, what maybe needs to be improved. And then you can also just see, you can sort by name, sort by owner. This is what I was talking about who owns it. We can sort by date modified. So yeah, all your projects are going to be here. Maybe I should just show quickly some of the global settings. So one thing is you can change the language. We could change it to French, for example, and the whole interface will change. Let's go back to English. Okay. All right. Go to the account settings here. And these account settings, when you just click on your name and account settings, It just changes that first information on the form that right here that you created. So there's that, but then you also have security, change your password, API, usage plans. Here's what I was talking about with the limited number of uses. So now it's only 5,000 submissions per month and 1 gig of storage. So as you can imagine, that's not a lot of storage, especially if you would want to use this for photos, audio, or even video storage. You could use that up pretty quickly. So, we've developed over time other ways of doing that, whether it's just collecting, collecting photos on your phone or on the computer or camera, coming up with a naming convention, and then just linking to those photos on like a Google Drive or Dropbox. I just want to stress again that this methodology that I'm presenting, it's meant to cost almost nothing. It's meant to allow anyone to go and do documentation. And when that happens, there's workarounds. But what we've seen is, at least with these projects, they have been more sustainable because underlying they're just Excel sheet. They're just a CSV file that can be shared, rather than creating a custom database in some system, paying some developer, where it could cost a lot, having to pay them more if you need to make changes to that, maybe the system depreciating or not working anymore, and then it's just sort of and then it's just a zombie database that's just there, that's hardly able to use. So you want the flexibility to be able to move from system to system, but then also at a low cost. So that, there are other options. And Lisa's organization, Mount Zion, they have a sophisticated database, and they also have people that can kind of help with the maintenance as well. So just kind of consider your own organization, your own project, and what level of support technically you'll have going into the future. All right, so let's go back to the main dashboard. There's all these different projects. Let's start from scratch, and then I'll go over some of the features. So to start from scratch, all you do is just click on this new button. And then, this addresses, Mary Beth, your question also about importing. You can import, it's XLS though, but there are other methods for importing CSV files as well. This is a place where you can do it, but we're just going to build from scratch. So you've created your account, and what we're going to do is just build our very first database. So I'm just going to call this cemetery test form just for now. And this is to demonstrate the different types of questions that you can create, or the different type of database fields. You don't have to have a description. You could if you'd like. And then again, the sector requirements and the country, these won't change anything. They won't even default. Like, let's say if we chose France, the language won't default to French. It's still, it's mostly just for Kobo's own internal use. Create a project, and now we're at the blank template. Here's the name that we created. This can be changed at any time also. Save up here. Let's go to the layout and settings first. So this metadata is information that anytime you collect a record. So for a cemetery, we have our form. You're at Mount Zion and you are recording one of the gravestones. Once you finalize that submission, then this type of information is automatically also going to be in your record. So like the start time of when you opened up the form, the end time, and then it also includes the username. So you don't have to like put the recorder's name. You don't have to manually enter that. This type of metadata or underlying information for each record will automatically be saved, and that helps you track down people or any errors that you might see as you're going through and curating the data collected later on. So that's there. There is a library, so you can build types of questions and then save it to the library and then just add them quickly. So you don't have to keep rebuilding the same types of questions later on. And then you can also have kind of cascading select. I'll get into that later, but it's, being able to nest certain types of questions underneath other types of questions or have kind of sections to your form. But let's just start off very basic. Anytime you want to create a new question, you click on this blue plus. Now you get an empty field, and this is going to be either the name of the question, if it's like a questionnaire, or the database field name. So, one common one that you probably want is ID number. If you're working at a cemetery, you want to have some sort of cataloging system for each grave or each tomb, or really any feature that you are recording, so that you can quickly go to that, but you can also ensure that you're not doubling up and recording the same thing in two different places. You add the field name, add question, and now here's all these different types of ways that you can enter your answer to the question or to the field. The most common is text. That's just a free text. There's no character limit that I've seen, at least. But then you also have just the option for number, decimal. Then you have this one, select many. So there's a lot of different options. I'm just going to build each type of question for you just so you can see how it works. For ID number, you may want it alphanumeric, especially if you're doing multiple cemeteries, or if you're breaking up your cemetery into different regions or sections. So we just may do Mount Zion, we'll just have kind of we'll do free text for that, because maybe we'll do like an abbreviation of Mount Zion Female Union Band Society, and then dash number like 0001 or something. You'll have your own ID system or cataloging system, but I'm going to put free text just because it is because I will want to include letters in that. So once you make a change, you'll notice the save button here. There's a star or asterisk that shows up next to the save. And that means that you've made a change to your form. So anytime you see that, just quickly save it. And that way you don't have to worry. It's saved on the cloud. Now anyone else who's on your project too, they'll see these changes, and it'll just be a global change to the form. At any time you can preview the form right here, just this eye icon. So we can kind of see what the form would look like as we're building it. And right now we have cemetery test form is the name, and then ID number, which is a free text. So you can put letters or numbers, anything you want. This validate, if you click on that, it's not actually entering data, it's just testing it. So there's a different way when you're ready to go live and start collecting. There's a different process, a different section of your project, but we won't get to that just yet. So just to show the difference, if we just had number, let's say ID number 2. Numerical only. So this time, if we select number, we'll save it. Let's just take a look. So now, if I try and enter letters, I'm typing letters on my keyboard, nothing happens. I can only enter numbers. So, it kind of has that quality control for you as you're creating the form. Another one that we always do, especially we're interested in site conditions, or, we are looking at regional surveys of what, mainly it's architecture, but also certain burials or graves. What are in good condition? What's in poor condition? What should we come back and look at? What needs our attention later on? And so let's just call this one site condition. Add. and we're gonna choose select one. So this gives you like a multiple choice, but for select one, when you're filling out the form, you only can answer one. You can't answer multiple. And so this works well for site condition when you have like, let's say, excellent, you know, just say good. You just click here to add more responses, fair, for, and then let's just say destroyed. You can always have an other. Anytime you have these multiple choice, I always like to have an other. And you simply take the site condition, create other, make it a free text. So there's other type of information that we should add that this controlled vocabulary doesn't reach. Now we have a place to put that. Save it. We'll take a look. And now if I select one or poor, destroyed, it won't allow me to choose more than one. This type of information is nice to have because in QGIS or a GIS system in particular, it's easier to display questions or fields that have this controlled vocabulary. So like on a map, we can show, for example, all the graves in a cemetery that are in excellent condition or green, for example. Everything that's destroyed or in poor condition is in red or orange. And from that Excel sheet or that CSV file, everything here is just like easy to move back and forth. In QGIS or GIS, let's say you had excellent, but then you also had excellent with a lowercase e again, then it's going to create two different categories in the display on your map. And then all of a sudden you have to kind of merge those. You have to go on the Excel sheet and fix those. So whenever you can have this controlled vocabulary, you can control what the exact terms are. It's going to help when you're trying to present this information on maps or other types of visualizations. So I hope you can see, though, that this, as I was mentioning, that this is a very easy process building this website. Again, it's just like, what are we going to put? What type of information do we want to collect? What's important to us? What's not? Because you could see, that this eventually could become a really cumbersome database because it's all on the same level. All the questions just appear one after the other. There's no hierarchy yet, about what information, like so ID number and site condition. One thing we could do is if someone selects other, then the site condition other field appears. And if they select good, then we don't want this to appear because it's just taking up space. It's just, especially let's say it's hot or it's cold or you're out in the elements and you have to do 50 of these and you just keep scrolling through all these questions that maybe aren't even relevant based on answers that you give above. So you can do this nesting type of question. To do that, you go into the settings. So you just hover over it and you click the gear bar. Another thing you can also do is mandatory response. So is it required that the person filling out the form does answer this? Otherwise, they can't submit it. But what we want to do is go to skip logic right here. And that just means we're going to skip this question if a certain condition in a question above is fulfilled. So if someone answers other, what we want is if someone answers other in site condition, this question appears. If they don't, if they answer one of these others, then this is hidden from the view. All you do is add a condition and you select a question from anything that is above this particular question. So it does matter the order that these questions are in for this type of skip logic. But we see here site condition, and then we have all the options that are created. So if we say site condition other, that means that this question will only be displayed when someone selects like site condition other. So let's just see how it works. Now we have this, it's hidden, destroyed, nothing happens. And with other, then we do this. So as as you can imagine, there's many uses for this. Like, let's say you're looking at iconography or symbols on a gravestone. Some have them, some don't, but there's a whole series of questions related to the symbolism or to the iconography that you don't want your recorders or your team to have to go through if there isn't any symbols to begin with. So they could just say, is there a symbol? Yes or no. If they say no, a whole series of 10, 15 questions is just hidden and doesn't show up on the form. But if they say yes, then they go through that whole process. So it does have kind of a nice way of organizing this information. And so then you got to think about what are kind of your large concepts that you want to have other questions nestled inside. Are there any questions so far? Okay, let's do a couple more things, a couple more example questions. The first is a point. So what's nice about this feature is, let's say you're on your phone and you have the form pulled up and you want to record the GPS of the location. You don't have like a separate GPS recorder. On Saturday, we're going to have some handheld GPS units that will show you how to use if you've never used them before, how to glean the longitude, latitude. But Kobo also can just use the GPS in your phone to record a point. You literally just press a button and it records that longitude, latitude wherever you are. I will say that it's not the most accurate because your phone, even if you've used like Google Maps when you're driving, sometimes it gets a little wonky or moves around. It's all dependent on how many satellites it has access to. If you're in tree cover or if there's tall buildings, you might get worse reception because your phone is visible to less satellites. And so, this type of recording is good for kind of regional, large scale surveys. Like let's say I want to take just the GPS point of a building in the context of other similar buildings around the country. It's not as useful when you have like at Mount Zion where you have gravestones that are literally centimeters apart and right next to each other. And our phones are getting better and better at this, at triangulating distance and knowing the GPS. But for kind of your final study, you will want to look into kind of a GPS unit for that sort of thing. But it's still very useful and it's still nice to use for certain types of surveys. This looks a little different than what it would look like on your phone, but basically on your phone, you'll just have this button right here that you would click. Since I'm on my laptop, it may ask, can it detect my location? It would find the point. If I did that, it would do the same thing on your phone. If you do have, handheld GPS, what we always do is we include separate fields for the longitude and latitude using decimal. And then, and basically we'll show you on Saturday how you can just find the longitude, latitude. It'll appear on the display and then you'll just manually put it in here. It'll be a little more accurate than if you took it from your phone. This form I haven't mentioned yet, you can move questions around. It's just drag and drop really. You can also clone or duplicate a question. So for longitude, when I want to create the latitude, I just want to duplicate it because I know it's going to be decimal also. So I'll duplicate it, and then all I do is just change the name of it. Oop. There we go. So as I'm building, I'm always just kind of looking at the form, just seeing how it looks. Yep. Make sure it's where I want it. Let's do a couple more. Let's do photos. So we have here photo, audio, video. I mentioned earlier, you do have the ability to collect all of this if you like, the video and audio. But if you take a 1 hour video and you put it on Kobotoolbox, that's likely going to be more than 1 GB already. That would take up your whole monthly storage. So even though it has it here, these features are for, I guess, the paid tier if you wanted to use that. We still, for cemetery documentation, we still are able to take usually 3 or 4 photos. And then if we have more than that, then we will link it. We'll take them separately and link it to like a Google Drive or something like that. But we do typically want 1 or 2, especially for cemetery documentation when you're looking at individual burials. You want to have 1 or 2 reference photos. The thing about this is the way Kobo works is this is just a photo question. You can't add any type of description to this photo. So you want to label the photos in a way that you can also create a caption. So right now, I'll take a photo, it'll show up, but there's no way of labeling it of what's in the photo at all, especially if you want that. So then you just create a text. Photo 1 caption or description. So there's little things about the software that once you learn, it becomes easy. Again, it's not as sophisticated in terms of its interface as maybe some of the commercial versions like FileMaker Pro or other types of databases like that. But it's flexible. And the reason it separates these is so that when you're looking at your CSV at the end, it's all just separated, all the data separated and easy to move into other fields or other database systems. Any questions so far again? Okay, so I would invite you tomorrow. I'll send the recording so you can look at this, but to practice creating your own database. It doesn't have to be the final one. You can just create one just to see how it works, but create maybe like 10 sample questions using different types of questions here. One I hadn't used yet is the select many. So let's go select many, and maybe we'll say it's like materials or what it's used from. And here maybe there's stone features, but also wood or metal or and in this case, if there's let's say you have a mausoleum or something, then you do have the ability to select many. We use this a lot, like maybe if we're dating or we're using time periods, and it's a multi-period occupation, then we want to be able to select different time periods or eras at the same time. We don't want to be limited to just one. And so, yeah, I see the 1 GB, the question about the limit is 1 GB per month. So whatever you create per month is not against your limit for the next. And that's correct. What we also tend to do is we'll collect everything, we'll collect photos, and then over time, we'll have someone go back and take all the photos, put them on Dropbox or Google Drive or something else, and then take those links to where each individual URL for each photo and plug it back into the photo field so that we're not using up a lot of data. Because just the text itself, you won't hit that 1 GB. But if you're documenting a cemetery over the course of a month and you have 1,000 entries or 500 entries, then those photos are going to start to add up. Okay, so practice that. And I just want to show you a few other features. The first thing being that right now we've created that project, but it's in a draft form. So you could search for it anytime. So let me just do this, search for cemetery. I think test. Sometimes you do have to kind of restart it a little. All right, so right now I have 102 deployed. And that's projects that I've already been working on, and then 5 drafts. So once you create a form, it's not actually live and it's not accessible to your team or anyone else until you deploy it. Deploying is a simple process. It's just clicking the button deploy, and that works. All that's doing is saying, okay, it's finalized. You could still go back and make changes to your form after you deploy. So I could go back here, add one more question, and we'll just say recorder's name. Make it text. We'll save it. We go back here. And basically I just want to redeploy. Otherwise, it's not going to, when you look at the form or you're trying to enter data, it's going to use the old form or whatever is the last form before you deployed. So it's just kind of a safeguard. There is ways to add additional languages too. So if you wanted your form to appear both, let's say in French and English, you could create, you could add French here. Oop. Just come up with any code. You just kind of create your own code. And now we see it here. And basically, when you click on this, I don't know if you saw it, but this little globe here, update translations, now it's going to show all of your original questions. And then here in the French side, you would just type in the same information, but in French or whatever language. It's unfortunately not automatically, it doesn't automatically change for you. But which might be a good thing, especially, in our field where you have specialized terminology. You don't necessarily want some AI or an automated translation to change something, and you don't have the ability to alter that language later. So you can just go through here, make the changes, and I'll just change this first one. I'll just change it to this. Save changes. I'll go back. Now if I go to the form, I think I'll just have to do this. Let's do this. Oh, and that's because I didn't redeploy. So I just have to redeploy anytime you make these types of changes. Hopefully it should show up now. Let's try it here. Nope. All right. I'll have to take a look at that. So it's not making the change based on the French. Oh, that's because I didn't put. You have the default, you have to have English and you have to have both languages. So English and French. Add language. Deploy. Oh, well, it's not showing. It'll show up in a few minutes once we actually start collecting data. Wanted to show you a couple of things. So here's the data tab. There's different parts of your project. One is data. The form is where we've been in the whole time. So you're editing the form builder here. Anytime you want to go back and edit your form. This is to preview. This is if you want to replace your form with another project's form. And then some of these actions, including cloning an entire project. So let's say you start and you wanted to make changes, but you've already collected data in it. You could clone it and make changes that way. Data, nothing's here because we haven't collected anything yet. Settings, this is just about this particular project, including how to delete it. And then summary, kind of one of the last things I want to show is this part, share project. So when you click on this, this is where you can add users to your project. So right now, I'm the only one that has access to this. If I shared a link to this project to anyone else or to you right now, it would just take me to the login screen, or it'd say you do not have access to this project. Once your team starts signing up and has their own username, then you can start to add people this way. Remember, again, it's case sensitive. And then there's all these different permissions that you can give, including viewing form, or just the ability to view the form. You can't actually enter any information. You can't even look at the data or the responses. You just could, let's say you want to share this form with someone, all the way down to manage project, where you have the ability to do everything, to create new questions, to change data after it's come in. And then you can also localize it where you could assign specific users can only change entries that they have actually submitted. So you have 10 people on your team. Each person has the ability to change their own records that they created, but not someone else's, if they have that type of permission. But then you can also share this publicly. So you could use this as just a questionnaire if you want for the public, a survey, something like that. You can create the form same way, and then you just share this link here, whether it's on your website or email or however you want to share it. And then people can go through and give answers just like a Google form or something like that. So, there's a lot of different ways you can use this and organize it, and have different levels of permission. All right, so that's the basics of Kobotoolbox. I hope it feels easy to use. I went through a whole lot, but I think just go to the form, start start editing, start creating your own questions and testing it, previewing the form, doing all these types of things. Let me go back, just because the very last thing that you want to do is when you're ready to start collecting, this is where you do it. You're in the form section of your project. Remember, all the projects are here. If you ever want to go back, you just go back to the clipboard, and you click on the project name that you want to go to. You'll always have these 4 sections, and you'll go to form. And then there's a couple options here. One is this Android application. So I mentioned earlier that you can download an app on your phone and collect information when you don't have internet connection. That unfortunately only works with Android phones or tablets. And these are the instructions for how to do this. We're going to show you how to do this on Saturday. But I think most of us will have internet connection when we're doing this. And the app is not nearly as easy as just doing it on the website. So you log in and you just fill out the form on the website itself. The reason for that is the app itself, and actually I'll show an example in the tutorials. Every single one of these questions is just one page on the app. So for like ID number, it would just be this field ID number, and then the rest is all blank. You have to fill it out and then press next and move on and on. So imagine you have 50 to 100 questions on the app going through. It could get really tedious having to go through next, and keep having to do that. Versus on your phone or a tablet or computer, it's just this kind of display where it's just, you just scroll down and it's a lot easier. You can see multiple questions at the same time. So the app is great if you don't have internet connection, and it's worked well for some of our partners. But I think in our context, just the website's going to work well. And you could do this on your phone after you start creating a project. Make sure you're deployed, you're live. You go to form, and all you do is press open. And now it opens the form, and this is actually the live form. So rather than the preview here, where it's just having you validate and it's not actually submitting anything, when I'm on the test form, if I enter some information, that's all that. We'll do all that later. I submit. And I go back to my data. Now that first entry has appeared. So whatever I entered in the form, now I have the start of my database, the start of my Excel sheet that I can use for all different databases. On Sunday, I'll show you how to edit this, how to make more changes to the data, more changes to the form. But just for our purposes, we're going to have a sample form ready for you that you can use just to practice doing some documentation of some of the gravestones there. And we're going to build our own data set here that on Sunday we'll go through. I'll show you how to do some editing and show you different ways of presenting and downloading the information, including downloading as CSV right here. So I want to move to photogrammetry, but I did want to answer any additional questions there are about Kobo before I move on. And again, Saturday, I'll be there for 6 hours, so happy to answer any questions you have, and we can go through it on your phone or tablet or whatever you bring. Okay. So we have about 25 minutes left, and I think I can get through this. I might jump through a few things that aren't necessarily related to cemetery documentation. But what we want to talk about now is photogrammetry. And as I mentioned before, it's just taking photos and being able to create a 3D model from that using specific software. The software we will get into on Sunday, which you can see here, but I wanted to show you an example of how it works and kind of the user interface of the software. But today, what I want to focus on is how to take the photographs, lighting condition, everything like that. Because the most crucial part of this process is having enough photographs and taking them in the right places. This is a purely visual model. So if you, for example, don't take enough photos, or you have a certain place where a certain place of this tomb, for example, where you didn't get a photograph of it, then it's going to be a hole in your model. And there's no way to manipulate the software to make that hole, to fill that hole with true data. What you would have to do is go back into the field and take photographs again. So we really want to hone in on the strategies of how to take these. I'm going to go through quickly this because these are just different examples of how photogrammetry is used in addition to cemetery documentation. One of the biggest is artifacts or objects, especially museums are doing a lot of digitization projects. And it's a fast, quick way. You can create a model like this in about 10 minutes or so, 5 minutes of photographs, and then with powerful computer, 5 minutes to maybe an hour of processing, depending on the size. I worked a lot on projects in Southeast Asia. This vessel came from an excavation in the Philippines and the Ifugao region. And in the Philippines, any artifacts that you uncover belong to the National Museum. We're not going to take them back to the United States or anywhere else that our team is from. But so we create a 3D model, we can create it accurate to scale, and now we at least have this object that we could create a 3D printing of, or at least just take measurements of and analyze from our computer at home. The cool thing about, oh, maybe that's not going to play. Yeah, okay. Other thing about 3D modeling is it lets you see certain details that might not be apparent just visually to your eye. This ceramic, for example, was handmade, and by creating a 3D model and playing with the lighting and shading in a virtual environment, we could actually see a handprint on it and see that it was hand pressed and learn about its construction, learn some information that maybe we'd be able to see, and maybe over time we could discern. Same about Zion, where they've already done some photogrammetry, and in certain grave markers, maybe it was difficult to see, or some of the inscriptions were just not always clear. Doing photogrammetry would allow you to, again, play with the shading and lighting and bring out these inscriptions. It's used for cave art as well, many different purposes for using 3D models just to kind of find out this type of information. I was going to go through this, but I think I'll kind of have to skip ahead. Basically, photogrammetry can also be used commonly in landscape analysis and in creating 3D models of entire landscapes. So previously in projects, this one again is in the Philippines, we would have to we'd have to create maps just using a handheld GPS. One summer, I just walked all of these rice terraces in the Ifugao region. We wanted to get a map and understand the agricultural process better. This took me about 4 weeks, just walking up and down, and it created incomplete maps because of that. The next year, we came back with a drone that has a camera attached to it, and it basically tied to an app. And I came back to the same valley and was able to map the entire region. Basically, as you're flying over this, you take a series of overlapping photos to create not just a 3D model, but almost like a better version of a satellite image that isn't available in this region of the world. Half meter to 10 centimeter resolution versus like 3 to 5 meters, where this particular landscape would be blurry. So 2014, I did this little section in 3 weeks by just walking around, encountering snakes, all kinds of hazards and things like that. The next year I come back with the drone and in 2 hours, do the whole valley and map it in what took 3 weeks of work. Photogrammetry in general, what you want to consider is just, you have the photographs, but what's important is that they overlap each other by 60 to 80% for each photo. And that's what allows the software to determine the 3D model and determine where each point should go, and basically triangulate the distance between 2 cameras and 1 point on the ground, or 1 point on your tomb, 1 point on your object. So this is just kind of to show you, just on the diagram. This is that overhead footage that I showed. Now I could just take an image from that footage, place it in QGIS and just trace the terraces rather than have to walk it. Same thing here. And what you can also do is create elevation models. It's the same idea as the gravestone, where you can bring out the inscriptions. You can learn a lot about the topography of any surface. It could be a landscape, it could be a building, from the 3D model, because the 2 cameras or the overlapping cameras are finding different points, and it's determining the distance between those 2 cameras and that point. Sometimes the point might be closer to those cameras, sometimes it's further away, but the result is that it creates these 3D surfaces. And so for agriculture in general, also, it creates nice elevation models where we can determine lower and higher areas, and use it for analysis of irrigation for those specific plots of land. Here's just kind of one of the 3D models that was created also. This is what's called a point cloud that we'll get into later. There's different types of 3D models. There's point clouds where it's just a series of very dense points. Again, all created by calculated distance between 2 cameras and a point, doing this millions and millions of times using hundreds of different cameras. The software is able to do all this, and you'll see that's not the hard work. The hard work is making sure you have enough coverage with your photographs. We did it for trenches too. Same thing. So just an architecture. I don't want to spend too long on this just because it's not related to our training, but wanted to show the many uses for photogrammetry. So let's go back to the Solomon Cemetery. This is one of the graves that we documented. We use Kobo to, take measurements, take a GPS point, and then at the same time, we would follow these reference photos where we might just have kind of a reference so we know which one is which, these flat images. Then we'll go back and we'll do a series of photographs for the photogrammetry model that we tied to it, just in case something does happen to this. All right, so let's get into the fine details a little bit. And these are just guidelines to remember on Saturday as you're taking photographs. You'll hear photogrammetry or the term structure from motion photogrammetry. It's both the same thing. And again, it's just basically you're creating structure by moving the camera. So the object doesn't move, your camera moves, you move with the camera. And by moving the camera and overlapping those images, you're able to create a structure or a 3D model. And then, the software we're going to introduce on Sunday is called Metashape. And it basically can take all those photographs and create the point cloud or create a mesh, create some sort of solid surface based on your photographs. Here's a kind of a description of what I was talking about. So let's say this is the object and this is a point cloud. There's 5 points. It's not a very dense point model, but you can see that image 1 is able to take these 2 points in its view, and image 2 has those same 2 points in its view, but it's in a different place in the image, but not too far off, just a little bit over. And so then it just takes these distances in relationship to one another, and all cameras in your phones and even like fancy, DSLR, Canon or Nikon cameras, those also typically record a GPS point as they take a photo now, and it's all in the metadata underneath. So the software reads all that and is able to create a surface. It's better to have more photos than less. You can always kind of go through your photos and use some of the photos and not others. But if you don't use enough, then the software won't be able to create your 3D model. So that's why I like this example here. This is just not enough when you have 4 photos. You want many photos for an object. You usually do what's called a pass or a circle around, and you do 3 or 4 of these. I'll show some other examples of this going forward. And then for an interior space for a room, it's actually better. The arrow is pointing where the photo is being taken. So it's better to stand on the opposite end of a room and to kind of work in a circle around it, but to take photos of the opposite side. And that way you get more of the room in your photo, and it's more of an opportunity for the software to find each other and to be able to build a 3D model. Lighting is crucial. And what I'm hoping is that Saturday we have overhead, not sunny skies, because kind of harsh contrast between shadow and light can really make it, can remove a lot of the details in your model. If you have a shadow that's showing up pretty deeply on a picture, that shadow is going to show up on your 3D model. You're not going to see what's actually lit there. So you want kind of flat and diffuse light if possible, and that's why overhead light, non-sunny days work the best, overcast days work the best, or maybe early in the morning or at dusk. It's okay if your pictures kind of come out low or come out kind of dark, and they seem kind of dark because photo editing software is able to brighten those up and keep the detail. But if everything's really light, and so if you have a really sunny spot and it washes out your object, the software can't reverse that process. And say Lisa said we have lots of shade from the trees, so that's great. Basically, the better the resolution of the image, the better the model is going to be. DSLR cameras and GoPros, are great. They're not necessary, especially with how good cameras are on phones these days. The main thing is that you have a sharp, clear picture where a lot is in focus, rather than you don't want to zoom in on one point or one other and have other parts blurry, because that blurry part is also going to be taken into account by the software. For lens, this again is all things we're going to go over on Saturday, but just conceptually, for the lens, you don't want to have different zoom levels. You don't want to change the zoom levels at all for a photo set. And that's because it's basically tricking the software into thinking that you're closer or further away from the object when you're actually not. And so that's going to change the math that it does to create the point cloud. So once you have kind of a lens length, of like kind of a zoom level, and also your brightness settings, everything like that, you stick with that for all your photos for that particular object, for that particular tombstone. The aperture is the depth of field, and that's basically, is most of the camera in focus, or are you zooming in and one little part of the image is in focus and the rest is blurry? I guess it depends on what you're taking a photograph of, what you want to do that, if you want to have the blurry background. For photogrammetry, you don't want any blurriness whenever possible. Whatever's blurry is going to show up blurry on your model. So just kind of think of all these concepts. On Saturdays, you're taking photographs of, kind of think in your mind, what's the final product going to look like? What's the 3D model going to look like? Is it going to be blurry? Is there going to be shade? What parts are problematic that you might need to focus on, little aspects that are going to show up in the model at the end. And then the ISO is basically how much light is collected by the camera. And so low ISO, your images are going to be darker. High ISO, they're going to be lighter. For outside, usually your ISO only needs to be at a 200-300 range. I'm going to share this recording. I'm also going to share a PDF of all these slides. And so they can be a guide for you going in the future, as you're, if you do have kind of a Nikon camera or something, you can change the settings based on these slides. And which I mentioned before, really the photo strategy is going to get you 80% of the way there to a good model. The software is going to do what it's going to do. I'll show you how you can change some settings to be a little more successful depending on what it is what type of 3D model you're creating. But it's really about the conditions and the type of pictures that you take, how many you take, where they're placed. And so, yeah, I always recommend more images. You want this 80% overlap between different frames. Doesn't mean all the photos have 80% overlap. It's just 2 images in succession should have 80% overlap between them. It may feel a little silly actually when you're out there doing it, because you just take a photo, you take like a half step to the right, you take another photo, and you do this about 100 times or more, depending on the object, and moving back and forth. And, I've definitely had people look at me funny as I'm doing this, but, you can go to a museum, you can go see an object that you really like, take photos of it, and then you have a 3D model for it. So the process itself is what's going to get you there. There are, in some instances, you can combine photo sets from different cameras, but for us, at a cemetery, you just want to use the same camera with the same settings for each particular object. Let's say you're doing one gravestone with one settings, and then you change the settings for another, that's fine. It's just that you don't want to combine those two to create maybe a model of both of them in the same area. You want to keep all the settings enclosed for each one. Glass or water reflective surfaces also do not render well And you could probably picture this if, let's say, you're doing glass and you take a picture and there's a little reflection, you move a little bit, the reflection often moves with you. And so that's just going to confuse the software. Again, the reflection is going to show up all around, and it's just too difficult for the software to be able to pull away from that reflection. It's really just what you see is what you get for these models. And then part of what we'll show on Saturday is other type of information you want to include in your 3D model, including a scale bar. I don't know if it's going to show up, kind of shows up here, but we're going to have a bunch of these that you want to place in different parts of the gravestone. And that way, once you process the model, you'll have the ability, or you'll be ensured that the measurements are true. And if you want to take a measurement, you know, like the width of the gravestone, just on the 3D model itself, you'll be able to tell that it's accurate because you have these scale bars there. Here's just kind of a couple of visualizations as we're wrapping up of what you'll do out on Saturday. So again, this is a pass. This is one pass right here, two passes. For something like this, usually you want maybe probably 80 to 100 photos, and you want 3 to 4 passes. If you're just doing maybe like the side of a building, or you just really want the front face of a gravestone, you don't have to do a circle around. You can kind of do these semicircle passes here. So here's one pass, you take a step back, you do another pass, and then maybe this part, you weren't sure if you got enough detail just because of the angle of this object. So you took a couple more detail photos here. Same with this. If you just want the, you know, a nice flat surface of it, you just do a couple of passes or rows. I think that might be it. I want to show one more example. And so it's like an olive press that we also the 3D model of in Tunisia. You can see the scale bars here. You could see this is the point cloud that I was talking about as you're building it. And this is just kind of going through the different process in the software of point cloud to wireframe, which is basically a series of triangles. The bigger the triangle, the less accurate it is. So you can see kind of parts here and right here, it's less accurate. And that's actually because there's shadow, what you'll see in the final model. And so the software is not really sure what, you know, how accurate that part is. Here's the shadow. And so it made the triangles bigger to kind of fill the holes, but it's also, you're not sure how accurate that model is. So, you know, this is a really fun process once you start doing it, and you'll start doing it everywhere. I have created hundreds of models everywhere you go. I did it of my daughter one time, and created a 3D model of her and then put her in like a gaming engine, and she can walk around as like a video game character. It's really all you need is your camera, which is really cool. The wanted to talk just logistics in terms of the schedule. So we're going to be there from 10 to 4, and you're welcome to come as long as you would like. We're going to have different stations, some practicing Kobo and working as a team to document a series of gravestones in an area. And then other parts, we're going to work on photogrammetry. Lisa will be there in the afternoon, and she'll also be there if you would like to speak with her more about the history of the cemetery and the region. Deborah and Rosetta will also be there. And so, you know, they're very excited to meet all of you and just really to connect and to find commonalities and kind of discuss the ways that these cemeteries are linked and ways of documenting them. We're also here, we'll be there to kind of help guide in terms of the technical aspects. Moni Islam is also on the call, and he works with ASOR staff, and we're both going to be there helping you as you need. You've probably seen Moni's emails as he's been sending out the links. We are thinking, because there's quite a few of you coming, of having 2-hour time blocks set up from 10 to 12, 12 to 2, and 2 to 4. And I believe we have a link that maybe we could put in the chat, and then we we'll also email out this link by email to everyone. And basically, if you could just sign up and say which one of those time blocks work best for you, you could definitely stay the whole time. It's really just for our planning to get a sense of where we should be focusing our attention during different different times of that day. But we're going to be there the whole time from 10 to 4. We will have snacks, we'll have water. There will be portable restroom, but there's also a restroom nearby that you can go to at kind of a local shop that I think if you just buy a bottle of water or something, they're usually pretty nice about letting you use the restrooms as well. But yeah, that's all I have for now. I went through a whole lot, but I think once you start using the software, you'll see one, how easy it is, and really just how fun it can start to become. I don't know, Lisa, if you had anything else you'd like to add before we sign off.
No, I mean, you're coming there. I mean, I don't know. People know what Georgetown's like, parking's not the best. But we're very close. I mean, we're actually, I think, walkable from DuPont Circle. There is a bus that comes right at the corner. Ubers come right to the address. We're walkable from M Street and such. So, yeah, it's a fun
Awesome.
day.
Yeah, and then just a reminder of the schedule. We're going to collect all this, and then we'll meet again on Zoom, which Moni will send out. Well, it's in that info sheet, but we'll send out the link also again on Sunday morning, where we're going to take everything we did on Saturday and start building some 3D models, and we'll take a look at the database. And also, I just want to have time where we can all have just free discussion and everyone can meet each other a little better. We did the webinar format today, just because I was running through so many slides and just makes it easier. But we'll make sure that Sunday is much more engaging, more conversations. All right, thank you.
See you Saturday.
Yeah, I'll hang around a few minutes if anyone has questions, but otherwise, yeah, thank you, everyone. We'll see you Saturday.